Hello, hello.
Hello.
Good Thinking 58.
Yeah, I'm stateside, but welcome to the pod. Welcome to Good Thinking, the podcast, the best of brands, marketing, and culture.
Thousands of people, top execs, the likes of Klaviyo, Complex, Walmart, Wall Street Journal, LVMH, all tune into Good Thinking Weekly.
And when we're not here, we run a creative consultancy in Good Co. So these aren't just entertaining little tidbits. They're insightful because we actually get what it takes to build a brand. We know what it's like on the inside.
Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, and Good Thinking on Substack for more.
All right, let's dive in.
Okay, so episode 58, as always, a ton to dig into, but one of the big takeaways for me in this week that I'd love to focus on are really, there's a lot of really useful learnings across the board, and maybe it's just my headspace coming out of South by, but there's a lot of really useful elements in everything and wanting to really focus on those and take out of those. So starting with culture, as we always do, Giggle Dribble is obviously like a lot to talk about, and I want to talk about it, but I'm actually going to move us to One Track Mind, because I think, as we've talked a little bit about, I think really that takeaway and identifying what Rachel Carton identified and you and others is really key and really, really insightful.
Yeah. So what Kirsten's talking about is Rachel had this interesting, she always has interesting letters, as you know, I'm a big fan, about her observation that the most successful, so the title of the article was something along the lines of, why do some brands not do well on TikTok and why have they not cracked it? And her theory was that on TikTok, because of the algorithm, because of the way it works, like a sort of one singular topic channel, so to speak, does best, right? So on like if you're on Instagram, like everybody will have their strategy of like, oh, like, not like, I don't think anyone's in the day of like Monday we do this and like Tuesday we do that anymore, but it's more like, hey, like, we want to make sure that we have some product features stuff. We want to make sure we have influencer content. We want to make sure we have UGC. We want to make sure we have storytelling, blah, 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 blah. There's a mix. And that works on Instagram fairly well. It does not work on TikTok, because essentially, like, people find you, their algorithms are really tight, their feeds are tight, and so they find you for like one particular thing, and then they go to your page and it's like, oh, like there's this over here and there's this over here, and that's really not like the behavior of people on TikTok. They're really looking to kind of lean into what it is that they lean into, right? So like, to separate it out, for like, in my mind, the way I've been thinking about it is like, when you see creators and they're like, hey, like, I'm like an expert in lymphatic drainage, say, and they'll just be like, honestly, the videos are somewhat repetitive. Like, it's like, oh, here's how I do this like method, and like this is how I do it in the morning, and this is how I do it at night. It's the same kind of content, like essentially all the time, and that's what works on TikTok. And so she was using this example of Alexander Wang, who has sort of like this series that he does on there, where it's kind of like, I would say, like these makeover, I don't know if they would call them makeovers, Wangovers, but you just have to watch it. But that's all he does, is the point. And they're just over and over and over again, and it's doing well because like it's it's essentially a series, right? Just for TikTok. Mm-hmm. It doesn't need to be this prescriptive in my mind, but it does work. And essentially that was the takeaway, is like, you need to kind of have more of a focus. Like, don't try to be everything to everybody, which we all know generally as far as a brand, but this is like really particular. It's like, has to be kind of super, super focused.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a great learning, and it feels like, because most people use TikTok as a resource, right, to go and find or learn and see the thing. That makes a lot of sense, versus kind of, maybe a world as one does more Instagram and inspiration.
Yeah, I joke that, like, even with food accounts, like, it's like not like all the different things. It's like, there are food accounts just of cheese pulls. How well does this recipe result in a cheese pull? Like, that does really well on TikTok. It also does well on YouTube. Oh, I think it's just the takeaway for brands is like, obviously to kind of like start to think about like, what are these sort of like, what's the like little franchise of the internet that you want to have on TikTok? What is your focus? But it should be something ownable, right? Like and that I think really needs to be the takeaway, is like, what is it that feels genuine and entertaining and well made for the space, and then also works for your brand? And I think that's why Alexander Wang version is interesting, right? Because it's obviously showcasing a skill, and humor and all of the.
Yeah, I mean, I think that content like is a bit, pushing it, which I really like. It's, they're kind of leaning on the entertainment kind of humor aspect of it. And it's a risk. It's a risk to kind of go after that versus just stay in the safe space, which I love.
Yeah. I mean, I think at this point we all know that if brands aren't following entertainment as their strategy on TikTok, then it's a road to not success. Right.
There you go. So I'm just talking to myself. Drugs and booze. Again, lots to talk about here, but I think, especially because we do work with a lot of food and beverage brands, a lot of alcohol brands, and a lot of non-alcoholic brands. The No Spritz Summer, I think we need to talk about for many reasons, personal as well, but also like where's the opportunity and what does a brand need to be doing?
Yeah. So the context here is that, well, if anyone's spent any time looking at the stock market this weekend, then you have the context for what's going on. The tariff situation is coming for European import booze brands. I mean, it's coming for all brands, quite honestly. Everybody is going to be affected by this. Is talking about how Campari, so Campari owns Aperol, and obviously living in Italy, I mostly drink Campari Spritz, but that really hasn't made it over to the States, so we don't have to discuss that. But the Aperol Spritz really has made a moment, and I think it's not just because people spend time on Instagram and TikTok looking at Italian vacations that Aperol is the drink of the summer, right? They have spent an enormous amount of resources, time, energy, effort in creating that movement. That did not happen because a drink went viral, right? They made that drink go viral. It helps that it looks very delicious, but they do enormous amounts of work with bars, both stateside and in Europe.
Right.
Europe doesn't really have,
That's a whole strategy in and of itself, which we've talked about, which is fascinating of what they've
yes,
really
and that's what I mean by that's what I meant by it's time for a brand to spin up its marketing campaign. So You're not going to become the drink of the summer a la Aperol Spritz without either excellent luck that some celebrity makes a joke on TikTok that goes viral that turns into everybody wanting to drink this drink, which has happened. More likely is that you're going to do enormous amounts of campaigning right before summer, with bar, in bar, out of home, on influencers who are going on vacation, so that you have that content, all of it. But I do think it's it's a real opportunity. There could be there's a very potential blank space. I've also seen a lot of people talking about white Negronis. So, anyway, there's that.
A lot of opportunity for a brand to really get in there. And curious what people think the potential of the brands that could be. Definitely let us know in comments of what brands, could kind of get in there and really take that space. If you're a brand that needs to get in there and take that space, we'd be happy to chat. All right. Silvers, alphas, and Zs. So 2 things, and I was going back and forth because the per se thing, obviously I can't get over. It's unbelievable, but also I'd like to take my children.
Right.
So
it worked. My husband literally read the newsletter and he was like, so we're going to take Harriet to per se this summer? First of all, it's one day, guys. So it's not an always on feature. Just so you know, in case you're planning to take your child to per se, I don't want to be responsible for the bill that you receive. I'm not responsible for anything that I write in the letter. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. We obviously know that alphas now, because they are so brand savvy, they are really brand savvy, much to the chagrin of many parents. They influence everything from detergent to car choice to furniture choices to where you go to dinner. And it's very clear why per se would try to ingratiate themselves, and there are a lot of alpha foodies. Your daughter is one. I know many, I don't know if she's per se foodie level. Most aren't.
Hudson would be.
Yeah, I think, one of my best friends, her son, loves bougie things. Like he just loves bougie stuff. Like, I don't know. Like he just really does. The other two don't. And he would be very into this. But, you know, I don't think they're trying to go after a one ticket kind of like bonanza. They're obviously trying to position themselves as like less unapproachable, more opportunity for families to kind of join into fine dining, which I do think is something like, as somebody who enjoys fine dining, I travel to a lot of cities and find myself in a situation where I can't often eat at the places that I want to go to because I have a 4-year-old. And I like love a lunch menu for that exact reason, because I'm pretty sure like most people are more accepting of like, but you know, I think it's just a general perception, and I do think fine dining like really does have to figure something out. I think there's a growing sort of like ick towards fine dining that I've noticed like perception wise of like they're much more into like kind of like rustic cuisine and da 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 da, and like that really like fine dining thing has kind of gone more out of style. So I do think it's interesting, but yeah, there's a market.
I also think it's interesting that they're, you know, it's a bit of a brand, a bit of a buzz thing, a bit of a positioning thing, but that they're actually going after alphas as kind of a direction of their brand. So you have a brand like Sephora that's saying like, no, don't even come into our store. And then you have a brand like Per Se that's saying, actually, we're going to lead with alphas. We're going to lead with the kids and see where that goes.
One day.
It's a start, is all I'm saying. It's a start. And it's not a, you know, it's not a takeover by any means where you should be changing your brand strategy to, but I think it's a yes and.
It relates back to another letter, and I'll link to it in the show notes of like, you know, MoMA is following the Tate's example of having a big family design festival, and so many, I was going to post about it in the next letter, but I can share it in the show notes here. Like Lamborghini did a collaboration with Silver Cross, the like really fancy stroller brand this week.
I saw
like,
that.
There's the design of it we have to discuss, because like I just don't like Silver Cross is known for such an aesthetic, and like for them to like completely like lose that for like this, like I don't know, it felt like they lost themselves in that collab, and I don't think a brand should ever lose itself within the collab.
For sure.
So always lean into your strengths in the collab, I would say. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I think brands see the opportunity. When we were in Milan last time, like there was like, you know, dozens of high-end brands that had standalone kids stores, right? And there's obviously parents are willing to spend the money on it. They want the experiences. Parents definitely want experiences to take their kids. This could be a special like occasion type of experience, but it's still an experience, you know?
Yeah, for sure, an opportunity. Okay, retail. So I think one of the interesting things across all of these, and I certainly saw this in Austin, is just the experience that everybody's creating. Like it's suddenly like we just turned on this switch and like everybody's doing this. So I'd love to like dig into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah. Well, as you know, the switch turns on a lot sooner than when you see it in market, right? So like I can tell you that everything that we've been writing about for the last year is why this is like, it's like, okay, we're working on our yearly budgets in 2023. And then they use that budget to develop these retail concepts, these pop-ups. These things they have long lead times. If you want to do anything for back to school, it starts in January at the latest. Like this isn't something that like somebody's like, oh, like, you know, spending is big in 2025. No, spending was big in 2024 and now we're seeing it. So if you want a service for this letter, it's that you need to be reading this letter and thinking about what your budget is going to be for next year to keep up.
All right. I mean,
all right.
It's
Should
everywhere.
we pause and go chat with our friend Fred?
Let's do it.
Hi. Thanks for having me on, guys. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Are you going to intro me? I guess we need to talk a little bit.
I mean, we probably should. Welcome,
yes,
Fred. You know, I think actually a lot of our readers know who you are because you were in our 2025 predictions, and I write about like things that you've said all the time in the letter. So I'm constantly referring to Fred as if you're like a Fred that just kind of exists in the ether of the letter now. Like you go by only your first name often. You're there. So if you read the letter, then you'll know who Fred is. But otherwise, maybe you could just quickly give a kind of a whirl on who you are.
Yeah, well, thank you guys, as always, for allowing me on your platform. My name is Fred Hart. I've been a brand and packaging designer for the last 15 years. Over the last 10 years, I ran, built, and grew a branding and design agency called Interact Brands. I left that in May, and now I'm just an independent brand and creative consultant and strategist.
Yeah. And he's being very humble because he also has an enormous platform on LinkedIn, and everybody follows him for everything food, packaging, CPG, like the whole world, and you're beloved. And he wrote a lovely recap, as I predicted he would, on Expo West. And so I thought we could come on and talk about it, but also have some questions for you about like things you saw and themes, and thought we could talk about them quickly.
Yeah.
Yes. Tell us
It was
everything.
my 10th year attending. You know, I've got a consistent track record of showing up to this thing, and I go to about 10 food and beverage trade shows every year. I'm a bit obsessive, but I think it's a lot of fun, and you get to see a lot of change and different things different year over year. This one was bigger than it's ever been. More brands, more halls, and actually they concentrated the number of days to be one day less. Inflation, I guess. You know,
yeah, I said
too.
Yeah, someone referred to it as the Hajj of like CPG, and that made me laugh because it's like a pilgrimage every year, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. But yeah, I would love to know like what stood out. Like, what was the biggest thing that you were like, I wasn't expecting that. If you saw anything.
I joked, and it's a corny joke with everyone. I was like, I didn't see any protein. It was everywhere, and everyone knew that it would be there.
Right.
It was interesting to see the forms that it took place in. There were a couple of surprising ones. Like there was a company called Select Harvest that is doing, you know, taking almonds and enrobing them in collagen peptides so that the entire bag protein serving goes from maybe like 10-ish to 30 grams for a bag of nuts. Very interesting. One of the other standouts was
already at Erewhon buying collagen
100%. I'm like, are they delicious?
Yeah. Yeah, they were all like, you know, very sweet, indulgent flavors, mocha, caramel, etc. But interestingly, there's a company called Sturdy that sells pasta sauce and has 80 grams of protein per pasta sauce jar.
Yeah, I wrote about that in the letter. Like, it's just, I feel like we've reached like max protein. Like maybe we're, you know, hopefully like,
yeah.
You know, I think everybody's trying to like kind of layer protein like into everything, and but consequently, I think it also makes it something that like no one begins to care about, right? Like it's like, oh well.
I have the same thoughts. Oftentimes, companies are no longer innovating for their audiences. They're just trying to keep up with what they see the category doing, which can be very misleading. Sturdy was interesting. I talked with the founder. I was like, tell me who's using this. And on one hand, it's exactly who you think it would be. It's kind of like the bodybuilders, the fitness enthusiasts. But the reason why they like Sturdy was fascinating. Protein, high protein consumption comes through like really sweet flavored shakes, as a lot of us know, right? You get the big barrels and it's chocolate, it's vanilla, it's all this stuff. There's not a lot of high protein savory elements outside of eating an animal, of course. And there's something monotonous about this. So putting in pasta sauce, a lot of people are just heating it up and drinking it straight. It's almost like a warm gazpacho, but it's bright, it's savory. It just hits a different culinary note than a lot of the other protein occasions. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, moms are apparently our big audience because they want a high convenience way to quickly make pasta, pour the sauce over it, and give it to their kids. Not have to worry about sensitivities to like, I don't like beef or chicken or turkey or the textures of some of these things. It's just kind of like already built in there. So it's quick, saves time, and gets, you know, kids a healthy dose of protein with their pasta, which is just wild. So that was kind of fascinating. On face value, you're like, this is too much. We've gone too far. But then you listen to who the audience is, and you're like, all right, like maybe there's some wisdom here in what they're building.
I mean, I have to say that does make sense to me, and I would probably be, again, the contender for that.
Yep.
Yeah, except that she wouldn't have it with the pasta because
no.
Drink it straight right out of the jar.
My kids would.
Yeah, and it's like a high protein V8.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of cool.
Yeah, you could make it into a Bloody Mary, and then you could sell Kirsten on a high protein Bloody Mary, and she'd be drinking them every day.
I'm in.
Yeah, protein vodka is coming next.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Tell me, I wrote to you a little bit and I was like, hey, like, tell me how you think, and your answer was interesting and I'd love you to unpack it a little bit more. But I was asking, like, how do you think, everything that I've seen was like, oh, it's like dates covered in candy, like flavor sour, like, so it's like sour candies, but made of dates. There's this, but it's like, you know, everything is like good, but bad kind of like, it's like, okay, like we're going to give you this, but it's sort of bad, but you feel good about it. And I think we've been on that train a long time, but now I feel like even with the probiotic sodas and everything, and then people are just like, maybe I just want regular soda. Like maybe I don't need it to be probiotic. Like maybe that's not necessary. And maybe not everything needs to be good for me. And there could be indulgence. Was there any indulgence there that wasn't good for you? And like, what do you think that's?
It's a great question. It tends to show up more at other types of trade shows. Because we're in the natural products industry, sugar is still relatively villainized. So everyone are trying to find hacks. And we talked kind of back and forth over email about permissible indulgence, which I would say the majority of consumers all seek. We know because we live in America with high obesity epidemics and diabetes on the rise and like all these other things that if we don't change our current consumption habits, like we're going to end up in a very unhealthy place. And many people are trying to avoid that now. So low sugar or sugar sweetener alternatives being in products, or, even put aside the probiotic craziness, just a poppy on its own face value, great tasting with 6 grams of sugar, way better than a Coke at 30. But at the same time, if you were to go to a sweets and snacks trade show, there won't be a single better for you thing there. It's all just confection brands. Artificial flavors are not an issue. It's just about fun, and they don't have a lot to market in terms of like attributes or claims. I think there are some categories of like pizza, for instance. There were actually a lot of wood-fired pizza brands that are then sold frozen, so that it's like the most premium tier that you can get in a frozen store. So like if you go to Brooklyn and you go to Roberta's, you can now buy that in grocery. And there's this awesome deaf and children of deaf families brand called PI00A. I don't even know how to pronounce it exactly, but really cool backstory. They had a brick and mortar restaurant in San Francisco. All the staff was deaf. It was really to do kind of education, but that aside, the pizza is just phenomenal. Pizza, there's nothing better about these things, like high quality ingredients and no artificial stuff, but it's still cheese and sauce and carbs at the end of the day. So you can make a name for yourself just selling quality. And there's a lot of companies that are doing that, but the industry is obsessed with making things better for you. And that's why protein is now coming into vogue. Because if you can tell me, oh, I can eat those pretzels I always had, but now they have protein, I'll consume more. Or pasta, I'll consume more.
Question for you there, though, given, the whole Maha, like, rise of, like, anti-processed foods, and none of these are reading anti-processed to me at all. Like, how do you see, were there any brands who were kind of trying to play to that group of people who were saying healthy is also pure, real ingredients?
I mean, that's the natural products industry as a whole. I think you have all of this no seed oil component really coming to fruition, particularly in nut milks and beverages, but even bars and other things. So there's an element of purity on one side, and then there's just an element of it doesn't matter how you engineer the product. Just focus on the macros and everything else will take care of itself. So it's wild to have, these two opposite ends of the spectrum at play at the same time, but the same thing's happening with plant-based, and now our return to beef tallow, like grass-fed, organic, pasture-raised, A2 milk, etc. Like you can find any audience you want at this point in America, which is wild.
That is true. And were there any brands misbehaving as you predicted that would be a big thing in 2025?
The best brand that misbehaved, and I'll have to send you a text afterwards so you can include it or something like that.
I can't wait to hear this.
It's Dude Wipes. And Dude Wipes had a giant inflatable ass at the show. And then they had a Mini Cooper parked up front of it that had, like a poop emoji on top. And so it was the like mini shitter or something as they called it instead of the Mini Cooper. Like they're just so brazen with their humor and misbehaving that is just so endearing. And it's tough because if you're another wet wipe brand, which there were several other of, you're just getting overshadowed.
Right.
And so, that would I say is probably the biggest one. But maybe you guys also heard Belgian Boys, a line of like breakfast products, had these puffy pink bags, and I witnessed it firsthand. And the security and the lines for it, and it was all the talk. And after the first day, someone did a TikTok, and then it got crazy after that. So there were interesting viral moments, and I don't know if that was planned misbehavior, but certainly in a trade show where everyone else is handing out canvas totes or not doing any fun activations, it's made a lasting impression.
Amazing.
That's great. I love to hear that.
Yeah. That brand I hadn't followed them before, but of course now I am. And like, there's a lot of women on that brand. There's some smart people working there.
Yep. Yeah. Slice had some cool activations as well. That's a brand trademark that had kind of died. Stuja, a juice company, private equity owned, went and bought the trademark and then re-engineered the soda but leveraging the historical equity that brand has and just general kind
Right.
of familiarity, and kind of reintroduced it at the show. And they were doing these fun little guerrilla tactics where they were vending machines placed throughout the show. And if you went actually up to it, you could press any button and it would just dispense sodas for free. So it was kind of like a fun way to drive trial outside of the typical booth and extend the brand touch points at Expo.
That's great. I love that. So people were trying stuff, like they were trying to do things, and it sounds like it was resonating.
Yeah, you'll get DJs and stuff at booths. You'll get companies
Yeah.
doing brand collabs where they'll, work with another company down the aisle and they'll do mixers. Or I was at Heyday, a cool kind of like
Beans.
canning company that does really interesting flavored beans, and they did a collaboration with Fishwife, which is everyone's favorite tinned fish now, and then a cracker brand, and the three of them brought products together, and they were kind of all participating in this cool moment, and people were coming over and having probably the most delicious samples at the show at that moment.
I love it.
Was there anything that you saw that you were like, brands should be doing this outside of a trade show that you don't see outside of a trade show normally?
Oh, that's a great question. I do think that the trade show is such an artificial environment because no other place do you have all of these challenger brands all yelling at the same time. So it's kind of like the loudest person in the room wins. But that artificial environment also creates greater competition and folks really thinking creatively about how to outmaneuver others. I think in general, if you thought that the world was going to be that high competition when you do activations or sampling demos, and you really brought the energy and brought a distinctiveness, you'd probably thrive really well. I think a lot of companies just use kind of a standard template removed from all of the noise. So in general, I just think it's the degree of creativity that could be enhanced outside of the trade show.
I love it. That's right up our alley. Well, thank you. I know you have a lot going on, so I'll let you go, but thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, we really
All right.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Bye, Fred. All right, tech. What's your vision? The Google AI-powered vision match. Give us a little bit of update, and then like even bigger picture, again, coming off of South by, but like, where is this going?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going exactly where, not to say that it's been going exactly where I've been saying it's going, but it's going exactly where it's going. I was right. So Google's new thing is sort of like you can verbally explain to it, like through an LLM, like, hey, I'm looking for a dress, like I want it to be flowy, I'm thinking it should have like purple straps, like if it could have a big backless, like, I also need to wear it with heels, da 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 da, and then it's giving you products. And this to me is, I had an anecdote that I was going to share in the letter, but I keep the letter really tight, guys, because I know that, it gets cut off. And people don't like that. So I will share it here because we have a larger platform. This is how people are searching. And the example that I was going to give was one of my best friends. She was the one who introduced me to Based, which is one of the brands that I mentioned in the alpha section. And it's a hair care brand, right? And for her kids, she is very, very particular about ingredients, as many moms are. And so she essentially asked ChatGPT to look at the ingredients and tell her the quality of the product based on what she has pro account, so it knows her preferences of things, that how clean are these, and rank it on a scale of 1 to 10, like how good is this for me and for my kids, and da 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 da. It was basically like, this product is full of shit, like you should not put this on your body. But then, without leaving the platform, she was like, okay, knowing what you know and what I need you to find me 5 brands that will do what it's doing, are perceived as cool amongst this audience, and her boys also have really fine hair, and she was like, and like a lot of product doesn't really work in their hair, which is why they want more product. Find me products that work with fine hair. And it gave her 5 brands. And in the future, she's going to be shopping in the platform for that, right? She's not going to leave to go to the website. She has to at this point because it doesn't exist yet, but we are months, if not days, if not a year away from every purchase happening within. And so that's just, I think this style of searching is, I think brands need to be really prepared. I don't think that they understand like that it is no longer going to be like, hey, I'm looking for evening wear, and that's how specific, and then people are just going to be drowned in content. No, they're going to be served up things, and they're going to be choosing from these things. So how are you going to be showing up, and what are you doing to prepare for this future? I think it's really big.
Yeah. I mean, the specificity, and we've talked about the specificity of AI specific to retail and how it's going to get, it feels like a Venn diagram of so many different things, of like the visual part of it, the category part of it, the, you know, ingredients or how it's made, the values, all of the parts and pieces.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about your findings of South by at the end, but I know that AI and agents and all of that were huge conversations. So I don't think it's that people aren't paying attention yet. I think that one thing that is interesting is I just don't think that people are really comprehending how quickly it's coming.
Yeah. And again, I think it goes back to, for the brands that are, for the people behind the brands that are, it's like, what do you need to be doing right now as it's evolving and coming, as it's not quite there yet, but it's clearly is on its way.
Mm-hmm.
Sport, running in, outdoor out.
Yes. So this was an article by Lois, who writes Snobette, which I really enjoy. It's one of the like Substacks that I look to in terms of like she writes a lot about sneaker culture, but she writes much more like, and she's great. Highly recommend this newsletter. Actually not a frequent sender, so if you're one of those people who like can't stand like the daily emails, this lady's for you. And she was writing about how running has done such a good job of kind of, and has been just growing at such an enormous level, and outdoors kind of in a contraction point, and you know, obviously in a contraction point in comparison to COVID, which it was like everybody, my mother was like in the outdoor spirit during COVID, so like there's obviously going to be a contraction. She writes a lot about how like why that might be the case, and how running brands have kind of been able to kind of like turn themselves slightly better into lifestyle brands than like a lot of outdoor. I would argue also that outdoor has become prohibitively expensive as a category, and they've really leaned into sort of their expertise. And then like, you know, it's like, hey, I'm not buying like $1,000 jacket just for the fun of like how it looks, right? Like, whereas like it's like, hey, running gear tends to be more price point central friendly. Mm-hmm. So I would argue that there's also that aspect. And same with the sport, right? Like get a pair of running shoes, and like, you know, if you can manage running, like it's the cheapest workout you can do possibly. Whereas like, you know, outdoors, getting up to the mountains, getting up and doing like, you know, like these are not small, low lift activities for people. So there's obvious reasons. But what I thought was interesting that she mentioned in there too was that in China, there's actually a huge boom in outdoor, I don't know if I would call it consumption or activity of people. And partly it's because the government has like leaned into, like we're kind of in the opposite, right, direction, where we're defunding all of the parks, but they're funding the national parks. So, you know, not all is out for outdoor. But I do think it's also interesting, like so many celebrities and like Diplo to Harry Styles and like all of these people are talking about running. I will just say, just like to pop onto things that we've talked about, and like everybody doing protein makes protein less interesting. Everybody doing running makes running less interesting. So I wouldn't take this as like, oh, like our brand should be like making sure that we're like relevant to running. So just take all of this with a grain of salt.
Right. Say. But if you are a brand that, like, I think run clubs, which, you know, have been happening for a while now, like that's been an interesting thing. If you are a brand leaning into something like that, I think has been quite successful as a direction. And I think if there's something within your brand world that makes sense within running, lean into it. But yeah, I agree. Don't suddenly be, you know, a brand that pulls in running for no reason. Wellness and beauty, few things to dig into, but I know you're really, really passionate about and insightful about the sexy injection. So I think it's worth talking about, and not just what's happening there and that example, but okay, so where is it going? Knowing that this, you know, as we've talked about, as you predicted, kind of is happening, and now, you know, it's only the pendulum's gonna go even further.
I just think it's, so what Kirsten is referring to is, and I was just looking, I was like, how do I say this name? This is the episode 200 of Christina Doesn't Know How to Say the Name. Maya. So this is an interesting brand. I think like it's really worth people going on their website to like see the level of like this aesthetic that they're leaning into. But this is a pop-up that they did, I think, in Selfridges. Mm-hmm. And you can see that it's like a medical chair, and they literally have like medical clamps holding the product, and they're talking about how these products are sort of like comparing these products obviously visually to like Botox for your face, you know, anything that you would get in a medical facility. And obviously they're selling makeup and skincare products, so it's not Botox. But it's just that what I think is interesting, and this is something that we've talked about a lot, is that this is I think it's reflective of a change that has happened in culture where we no longer vilify Botox or these kinds of cosmetic treatments are no longer by many just like, oh, like that's something that like people do in a medical office. Like, no, this is just part of like going to get your nails done, going to get your Botox done. Like, it's like all part of the same thing. So this is really leaning into that aesthetic. We did have a really interesting comment in the comment section from one of our readers, Dinah. Again, episode 386 of Christina Doesn't Know How to Say Your Name, where she kind of brought up the similarity between this and a NARS Stephen Klein campaign, like from way back when, and like this was definitely on the mood board. And you know, like obviously this kind of like dystopian vibe is something that does the rounds, right? Like it's like kitten heels or lipstick or short skirts, like they all eventually come back around, like waiting for the pointy toe shoes to come back. You know, you're waiting for skinny jeans, like we're all waiting for the comeback.
Right. But I think it's really interesting is it's something that I feel like it's converged from like culturally, like it's something that's no longer, you know, a taboo or, you know, like we no longer think about it that way. And it's really seeing that evolve in culture, but also now really in product and how people are looking at it. And I think it's especially relevant to next gen.
Yes, for sure. And I think just the way that people view procedure, like, you know, it's like the whole amino acid thing that is growing, right? Like
it's growing.
It's growing, and it's growing obviously in a very particular segment of that's how these things start, right? And I think that injectables in general have gotten a huge, I think GLP-1s helped Botox, you know, the fact that it's like an injectable thing, like, and people are no longer afraid of injections because now they make you skinny. Like everything in this direction, I think will change. And I think you're going to see a lot more kind of mainstreaming of injectables in general.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly it. Like it's literally the act of doing it that have made people no longer afraid of it, no longer a taboo, as well as people actually talking about it and sharing it with each other. And like and so it's just interesting to see like that cultural point. Travel. Again, I feel like this is something that's for larger industries as well. So I wanted to really dig into it. I definitely needed those eye patches, but that's not what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the travel ring because I think that's just really fascinating and makes a lot of sense. And where else can you go? Where else is it going to lead potentially? Where's the opportunity within other industries or other things?
Yes. This is I think we'll talk about it a little bit more in the South by section, but like sort of reading in the comment section, right? Like this is a behavior that people are doing. So what Kirsten's referring to is that there's this article about how people, and I for sure know about this. It's been around for a while, and I mentioned that I also think that people are buying gym rings, but essentially people are buying dupes of their real engagement rings. So not just like a substitute ring, but like actual dupes of their real ring because it means something to them for traveling. So it's like, hey, I bought this really, you know, I spent a ton of money picking out the design and it's really important to me. And it's like, you know, identify with it, And I also want to be able to travel with it, but I don't want to travel with my, you know, multi-$1,000 ring on my finger. And this is a behavior that has been happening for ages. I think it's just interesting that brands are starting to like kind of actively and proactively create this as a category that like, so like one of the brands mentioned in there, they will like make you, because I think if I read it right, essentially it's a custom engagement ring like website. So when they make you a prototype, they essentially make it as the travel ring so that you're not throwing away that prototype. Like it's like, oh, this is like the dupe of your ring. And then when you get the real ring, then this is what it will look like.
Yeah.
Super
interesting. I mean, it's super interesting. And I think it is something that's pulling from, you know, what people are actually doing. And I think the gym thing is really real too. I know a ton of people that do that. And I think it's really about like, where else, what other industries, where else is the opportunity, understanding people are traveling on, understanding gym's a thing. And, you know, there's an alternative, there's an opportunity for an alternative of whatever the thing is in those spaces and probably beyond.
Yeah, For sure. I even think a lot about eyewear with like gym stuff. Right? Like I like people who wear glasses and like they don't really like to wear their real glasses too, but you don't want to like wear your cheap gross glasses either. Like there's lots of like things in this space that are kind
Right.
of related.
Yes,
And
exactly.
I think it's just there are opportunities in other places.
Lots and lots of opportunities. Well, that takes us to the end. Fun for the week. We're gonna pivot and do a little South by update.
Yeah. Before we close, though, how amazing would it be to have a travel ring pop up by a great brand at a hotel? That would be amazing. Like if you were
Yeah.
like Tiffany's, but it's like Tiffany's travel edition.
Right.
But,
Well, you got to get it before
the
they travel. Yeah.
or no, like they can because they can put their rings in the safe, So it's like this is the ring that you wear out, but like it's in general. I just think it's an interesting idea.
I think the idea and the premise, and this is a very good transition into it. The idea of like, this is a behavior that's happening. And instead of like, we always talk about, especially in social, like instead of creating a new conversation, like this is already happening. So what is the relevant space for your brand, for your product in that space? And they really, really did that. And I agree with you, like the travel pop-up, like there's so much off of that. If you just really hone in instead of saying like, well, we've got this to sell, or we want to do something, create a new conversation, like what's already happening that's out there. And then how can you really enhance it?
Agreed. All right. So tell us about South by. What's the lowdown?
South by was great. There's a ton of recaps and things happening. I think overall people were really ready for it. Like it definitely felt, and everybody I talked to, it felt very connected. It felt people were really excited to be there. They were ready for the experiences that they saw. They were ready for the talks. They were ready to kind of connect in a very heartfelt level and see some amazing content. It was just a really overall, I heard a ton of people being very inspired, really excited of what they were seeing and what they were doing. So buzzwords, it basically became a drinking game of agent, which AI we heard a ton of. Fandom, that was another favorite from from all of the people. And then lore, like brand lore, like those were the buzzwords that were for sure happening across the board.
Lure or lore?
Lore. So brand,
lore.
I know, and I had to look that up. I was like writing my notes and I was like, no, it's brand lore.
Yes.
Brand lore. Yes.
Yes, which we talk about a lot. And I think it's really, like the Severance thing, like when we were talking about their pop-ups, like what was successful about them was that they were leaning into sort of like the fandom's interest in the lore to tie it all together.
Right. And use an agent somehow in that and you win. Yeah. And there was there was a session, I wasn't there, but somebody recapped it as far as breaking down why Severance is so, like their word building and all of the parts and pieces, why that hit so hard. And so that was what was fascinating. You kind of got this insight across all of the things like that are really happening. And I don't think any of the conversations were like, oh my God, I didn't realize that was happening. The biggest things that I saw were really around AI, kind of midlife / menopause and kind of women in sport. And so nothing is kind of groundbreaking necessarily in conversations there, but there were a lot of things that confirmed things and a lot of kind of aha moments. So, I think listening to a great AI talk, and I did a lot that was at Fast Company and Inc., which they both, and She Media, they all did a really nice job of curating the content, like having a point of view, but also having a great moderator to really bring out the right questions and the right balance from the people. One of the big things that I think it's the creative director at Duolingo said was like they really truly understand that their next content idea is in the comment section. And you can tell as a brand, like they really truly lean into that. The other, I think, great point from another AI conversation was about really understanding that the chats have different personalities. They were saying that they, put something in GPT and they put something in Claude or whatever it might have been, and they get different responses. So I think really understanding what those are and then really leaning into that.
Yes. I would also say that unfortunately, for better or for worse, chat can change its personality. Claude's more specific, but like sometimes you'll come on and you can ask chat something and it will be like one type of person that you're going to get and another type of person. I think it's just like an interesting, it's like when you call and I've just been dealing with like the most ridiculous airline things, right? And it's like I'm trying to have a conversation with Lufthansa That is a very different conversation than I was having with United. Let me just tell you, United did very well in comparison, run by, same group of people, but like completely different conversations in terms of the bots and the people and da 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 da. And it really changes your brand perception. And this will be the case in a big way with agents. And I think that's, again, I think it's just like something that people don't really realize, that when they're dealing with this world, like that's the interface that people are going to be dealing with. And it's understanding it and like using it. And if at the very least, like I think if you're a brand leader and you're not daily using one, if not multiple of these interfaces, you are like sleeping at the wheel.
Totally. And so moody chat GPT, got it, right? We're all allowed moods, and apparently the agents are as well. And I think that was another really good point. And I think something that, when we talk about, well, what can people be doing? What can brands be doing? What can people coming up be doing? Somebody mentioned as far as the references and the information and the way that you direct AI is going to be so important. So it's like really having the real art references, really having like, that's what's going to differentiate. And that's really going to be so key, is to really, what's the information and how are you feeding it? And to really, to your point, be trying things, be doing things, be working with it, be understanding the different personalities, all those different parts and pieces. And then really coming from a place where you have the references, you have the background, you have to really be able to direct it.
Yeah, but I think you're making a really smart point. And like, again, I've said this before, but like the way you need to be thinking about how you are describing your product, like your website needs to completely change its mind around, like you need to change your mind around what the purpose of the website is for. The purpose of the website is not to get SEO to tell you that you have an excellent collection of summer dresses. Like that is not going to do you any good anymore. And I think it's more like, it's going to be much more like, I could see brands writing stories about their products, right? Like entire fucking novels. Like it will be like, okay, this dress is going to be perfect for this occasion, this place, this is the mood it's going to give, this is how you're going to feel when you wear it, this is what it's going to like look like with heels, this is what it's going to look like with flats, this is what, like, like, so you're not just describing the physical product, but you're also describing like the user, or the consumer of the product. You're describing like the setting of the product. You're describing like everything is going to matter, because it can consume all of that information in 2 seconds, and it's going to use those things. Like, so even like, like nowadays, I feel like when you're describing sort of product benefits and you're like, oh, it's clean ingredients, like, well, what does that clean ingredient really mean? Like, and I think you're going to do a lot more comparison of like, hey, like this is like, this ingredient is good or bad for like, it's okay for this reason. Like, I think there's just going to be a lot more effort having to be made to educate and so that AI trusts your product and wants to put it up.
I mean, yeah, I think that's a mic drop moment as far as everything matters. And we were just talking about AI and what can people be doing. And it's really about that. One of the panels, and I think many of the panels, people reiterate this idea that like AI used to be your CIO's like job, like it used to fall underneath that. And now it's really about business transformation, and it's including and a part of literally everything that you're doing. But to start really being within that storytelling, yes, like you've got to do more of that, but it's also such an opportunity to, yes, do more of that and then really see your brand and your product go.
Yeah. I think it's going to be, and just to kind of tie it to the agents, because I'm not sure everyone knows what an agent is, and you've been like spending a lot of time, but agents will be really what is sort of, instead of, I'm typing in dress and like, and then it does it, it's going to be like, hey, I'm planning a trip to my sister's wedding, right? Like this future is years, if not weeks away. I'm planning a trip to my wedding, my sister's wedding. I'm in the bridesmaid. I've been told that it is this color, this thing. Like, I like gold shoes. I don't like silver shoes. I also want you to buy the dress and have it sent to my hotel. I want you to order it with matching shoes and jewelry that goes with it. And it will do that for you. Like that's what an agent is. Like, it's going to act on your behalf. Like, other ways that it talks about it is like what I was dealing with this week with all of these flight cancellations. Like, there are agents now who can like act on I haven't I should be using them, to be quite honest, like act on my behalf. And negotiate kind of like the refunds, the rebookings, the this, the that. And like I think again, like even in travel, like that's gonna affect everything. Like it's like, hey, I'm moving from this. I need a hotel, but like I had to stay at a hotel because my flight is like earlier in the morning, and so I need to be there. And so can you book me a hotel? What hotel would you like to book? Oh, okay, well this is my budget and it's just gonna do it for me. Like I'm not gonna be there. It's going to give me options and I'm going to yay or nay them. And why will I yay or nay them? Because of brand instincts. And that is, I think, also another like particular thing that brands need to be realizing is that it will be both preparing for this world on a technological level and preparing for the type of decision-making process that people will be going through, which will become much more about brand awareness because they're going to be given 3 options and which one are they going to pick?
So true. So true. Yeah. So a lot there. Yeah. The next track that, again, like this is kind of curated what I was interested in, but very much a theme there. Midlife, a lot around menopause. And I think there was a lot of kind of information kind of digging in. But honestly, the biggest takeaway, and it's something that we were just talking about with regards to injectables, is that basically media and marketing and brand need to catch up. Because how we talk about all of this is we're not afraid to say it. We're saying all of the words. We're saying menopause. We're saying period. We're saying all sexual health. We're saying all of these things. And it no longer needs to be a whisper conversation, both in the way that brands or media or marketing is talking about it, but also in, I think, the visual representation. I think there can be more confidence within brands. And the best example that somebody brought up was that periods used to be shown, remember a while ago, for sure dating myself, but like exactly the blue liquid. It's like, it's not blue. It's not blue.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at least the color of the liquid could have been better. We know what the color is, guys. These are periods from inside your body. Yeah. And I think that speaks to actually the giggle dribble thing, which I'll just kind of hit on, is that I think like, that conversation, the idea of the giggle dribble, which is a comment section kind of observation. So I really liked that as like people recognize that. You could also have the trampoline, like rebounder leak and like all of the ones that women talk about all the time.
Yes.
What bothered me was that the visual representation of it was still like quite like there was a humor, so I did like the humor aspect of the ad, but like the visual representation on the site and everything still feels like it's like, hey, like this is an old lady brand thing. And like I know it takes time to update, but like I'm not interested in buying anything that makes me feel like an old lady, regardless of if you use funny language or not. Like the two things need to match.
Yes, 100%. And I think that was a huge theme across the board. And I think you and I mean, we send each other kind of Instagram, messages of like, this brand is an opportunity, this brand. And I think, and myself being in this space, like there is not really an aspirational brand. And I think we've been talking about it for a while. Like now is the time to really level up. And I think that's part of that, both in conversation, how we're talking about it, but also how things look. Make it aspirational, make it confident. Like you shouldn't be ashamed or afraid of anything in this space. And I think that's really where one of the big opportunities is. And then the last track was really around women's sports, women in sports, and nothing new here necessarily, but just more confirmation, affirmation that all of these things are happening and happening in a really, really big way. The idea that, athletes, it's no longer really about how, how athletes are really fitting into the brands, but that these athletes really are the brands. And so they're really world building and really all around that. But I think making a significant shift into the female athletes.
Love that.
Big experiences. So Rivian was the sponsor of it and definitely like showed up in many, many places, but they basically took a parking lot on Congress, on like maybe Congress and Fifth, and had 2 huge dirt piles and there was a huge, huge line to stand in line and get into a Rivian, know you could not drive, which obviously was the first thing I asked, and be driven up and down these dirt mountains. And it was like a thing. People were talking about it. People wanted to do it. People were experiencing it. I don't know if anybody that has a Rivian, which is definitely a car I love, is ever actually going to use it for that. But it was really interesting that they took kind of a true experience, really trying to understand what the car can do and really visually quite compelling. And it worked.
Let's compare that to what you saw Amazon do.
Well, yeah. I mean, one of my favorite places in the entire world, the Hotel San Jose, which is a bunkhouse group, but now been, I guess, sold to the Standard, and then maybe Hilton. Really just this beautiful hotel that's been in the landscape on South Congress for years and years and years. I walked by and was unable to go in because there was a takeover. And the challenge that I had was that it was a takeover that was literally just kind of a big, bright blue Amazon Prime logo takeover. And an experience that could have been anywhere. It could have been a pop-up at Disneyland. It could have been a pop-up in LA. It could have been a kind of a pop-up anywhere. And you have this really beautiful opportunity to integrate into the culture of what's happening at South by, into the landscape of this beautiful, iconic property. And instead, they just felt and just literally took up the space in that. So I was iterating on this as you and I chatted about it, and I was thinking about it later. So San Jose does this pop-up called South by San Jose in their parking lot. And they have these really beautiful different local vendors selling jewelry. They've got this rad coffee shop, Joe's. They have all of these they have bands playing. And every year they create these iconic brand posters that are kind of these hatch show print. You want to buy them, you want to collect them. They could have done something like that. Yes, the Prime logo is there. It's a part of everything. You're very clear. They're talking about their shows, but they're integrating it into an experience versus just creating a pop-up in kind of a specific area.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, like there's, like Joe's, like burritos, right? A kind of legendary, like breakfast spot. Like, why was there not this amazing expansion of an idea like that, right? It's like, oh, we're going to be the breakfast spot that everybody wants to come to. And it's going to be this amazing, like all day breakfast, 24-hour diner type of vibe or whatever. Like, there's just so many ways that you could have taken anything at all from the culture of the place to have made it more and made people feel like, hey, like I actually got to experience Austin and the hotel and all of these things. And you walk away feeling like, wow, like Amazon really gave me something versus Amazon just like put its logo in my face and I got to like go to whatever event they were having there, like great. But like, you didn't feel like you're not feeling closer to the brand. And I think that's something in general that I don't think brands think enough about is like, these experiences, and when you do them well, give you a feeling about the brand. Like that's why when like Rode activates it, like when Rode does a pop-up, it realizes that like standing in line is 90% of the experience, right? And it sucks. And they don't want you to walk away thinking like that sucked, but I got a good like lip balm, right? Like that's not the point. So then they have all of these other additional experiences to make you feel like the Lion experience was like this amazing thing. And so you feel like, oh, the brand really gets me. They understand that I'm going to be a fan here, that they come for a really long time. They understand, and you walk away thinking like, wow, I feel really seen, heard, valued, and you gave me something. And I feel closer to the brand. And if you're not thinking about how your experiences are making people feel closer to your brand, then I think you're kind of missing the point.
100%. I think that's really well said. And I think there's such an opportunity. It goes back to that emotional connection. And that's what creates, brand loyalty, brand lore, like all of those parts and pieces. You want to feel something. And there is such an opportunity to create an experience versus an event every time.
Yeah. It's exactly the difference, I think, between fandom and like a consumer, right? Like a fan is a fan of the brand because it's like Duolingo. Like the reason people cared about the death and not really the resurrection is because the death meant something to people. Like even though it was funny, like it really like meant something.
Yeah, totally. All right, so just the last thing to hit on is Austin, South Congress is the new meatpacking. There is every store there known to mankind, and they're doing it in a really big way. They're like pushing in on visual merchandising, on presentation. You go into the stores and the people representing the brand are thoughtful, like the right people. They're dressed the right way. They're speaking the right way. They make you feel very welcome because it's Austin. Like it was just really a beautiful experience. Not necessarily many people in the stores, but really a beautiful experience across the way.
I would also tie that to something that I read an brand talking about that was popular at Expo, is that they were saying like, and I think we all know this, but like just to reiterate, like the staff who work at these events and these like retail, like I know that like it's really difficult to train staff. We get it. We've worked in like retail space for a long time, but like it is fundamentally like one of the biggest parts of your brand. And that is true for events, like staff, the people that you want to shop Like you should feel like you're entering and you're like, oh my God, this person like feels exactly like me and I might be best friends with them. Like, are we already best friends? Like that should be the feeling in your events, in your experiences, in your retail. And I think that like, you know, as AI becomes more and more prevalent, I think that desire for that is going to only increase.
Totally. Yeah. And they really nailed it there. And then just the last thing to hit on, and Austin was the perfect place for it, but just this vibe of modern cowboy. They, of course, just nailed it. And there's a bunch of different stores. I'll share some photos if we want to include anything. But they just really nailed it. And it just felt like the right time, the right opportunity, the right mix, right? There were a lot of men's stores that are doing this and doing this well. And it's, you know, got to be the right brand for it. But doing a little mix of that, whether it's kind of a more modern silhouette with kind of more of the kind of cowboy print, working in kind of different hats and different accessories and things like that, that kind of gave you a nod to vintage. But it was really a very nice, inspiring mix of kind of modernity and like kind of more fashion forward, but also this nod to cowboy.
I love it. What'd you buy?
Yeah. I mean, you know, some things, looked at some hats. I was generally pretty good, generally. But honestly, the thing that stood out to me the most, and this is such a me thing to say, but it's really, really fucking true, is how just the connections and the people that you would meet, they were really heartfelt conversations and you really felt connected. It really felt like everybody was really wanting this experience. And it goes back to the IRL. It goes back to the Breakfast Club. People really want community. They want connection and they want to be in person. And I think it's just going to grow more.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I heard a lot of people say like, hey, I'm not going to South by because South by is so over. But I actually think that there is a sort of a resurgence happening of actually like, if you're doing it right and creating experiences for people and it's not just like, you know, the loudest voice in the room and like the, you know, type of situation, I think it actually could be a time where this is really actually what people want.
Yeah, we are 100% ready to be back in community. So I think it's about asking your brand, you know, how can you do that?
Amazing. All right.
All right.
Ciao. This was fun.
We did it.
Forgot to say, or did you cut it off already?
No, we're still going.
Okay.
We're rolling.
I was going to say, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube if you like this. If you need if you are watching this on YouTube and want any of the context outside of this, obviously follow us on Substack at Good Thinking for more.
Yeah. Give us a little heart if you're into that, because that helps us in the algorithm. And honestly, we'd love to hear what you have to say. So we want more comments. We want more dialogue, more conversation, more community. So let us know.
Yeah. All right. Ciao, everyone.
Bye.